Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the continuation of the Take Charge Empowerment series. This morning, we're talking about living in a world after COVID, life pivots and plans. My name is Rachel Kuipers, and I'm Program Manager with Programs 50 Plus at the Chang School at TMU. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the land upon which Toronto Metropolitan University is built. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for nature and the people who lived on the land where TMU is located today. At the university, we have made a deep and long-lasting commitment to truth and reconciliation. I would invite you to learn more about this work on now. Now, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's events. Please ensure your microphones are muted throughout the event so as not to disturb other attendees or the presenters. Please refrain from having your video on. However, if you decide to leave your video on throughout this presentation, please be mindful of your actions as your camera is visible to everyone attending today. For the hearing impaired, we have automated captioning available, which you can access by activating it in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Now, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the chat box of the control panel, and that's at the bottom of your screen. You may send in your questions when prompted by the presenter during the question and answer session, which happens at the end of today's presentation. Please note, the opinions expressed in the events today by the speakers do not express the views or opinions of Toronto Metropolitan University. The information provided in this event is for general information purposes only. This event is in partnership with the Chang School's Programs for 50 Plus, the Life Institute, and CanAge. The Programs for 50 Plus at the Chang School is dedicated to providing access to traditional and non-traditional learning and programs that support active learning and healthy aging. The Life Institute enables adults 50 years and older to pursue their passion for lifelong learning through a wide range of educational courses, activities, related opportunities to volunteer. And CanAge is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization working to improve the lives of older adults through advocacy, policy, and community engagement. Now, it is my joy and pleasure to introduce guest speakers, Lynn Kovac, Jane Graydon, for today's event. A little bit of information on both. Lynn Kovac is an experienced marketer and strategist with over 20 years experience in sectors ranging from media, government, not-for-profit, life science, technology, sports, entertainment, and much, much more. In early 2022, Lynn was diagnosed with breast cancer and as a result took a step back from her role as managing partner at a global marketing and IT agency to focus on her recovery and her family. With active treatment behind her, Lynn had to decide whether to continue in her high-stress, fast-paced career or reinvent herself completely. Jane is an ICF accredited leadership coach experienced thought partner who inspires leaders to realize their full potential and deliver unprecedented results through feedback, self-discovery, and accountability. Today, Jane and Lynn will help us explore what it means to find meaningful and fulfilling in our careers and to some degree in life itself. So without further ado, I pass the mic over to Lynn and Jane.
Thank you very much for those lovely introductions. As mentioned, I'm Lynn Kozak, and oh, why is my screen not advancing? So this might seem like a lot on this slide to take in, and it might seem overly gratuitous to be sharing a lot of photos of myself, but you'll understand when I click through why I decided to share so much about myself personally. So I spent the majority of my adult life defining myself in specific ways. I viewed myself as a wife and mother. I'm a marketing executive. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, world traveler, having traveled to almost 40 countries. I'm an animal lover, adventure seeker. I love to read. I read anything from to dense novels to science. I just love to consume knowledge. Voracious reader and learner, and I'm a perpetual student. So not only have I gone back to school multiple times as an adult, kind of post-secondary school, I'm also learning passively just through life in general. So when you take all of this in, this became my identity for most of my adult life. And then I got cancer at the beginning of this year. All of that went away and this became my identity. So all these things that I had thought were me, I wasn't able to be or do anymore just because I was immunocompromised, I was exhausted all the time, I was unemployed. So my identity crashed at the same time as my health crashed. But then I moved through that. Over the last 9-10 months, I've gone through surgery. I've gone through 8 rounds of dose-dense chemo. I've done 20 rounds of radiation. I've had my lung collapse. I've had heart damage. I've been on a path of recovery and rediscovery. And so I now define myself as a cancer survivor, and I'm figuring out what those other pieces are now. How do I identify with myself, with my family, with my career, with the world in this new position that I'm in? And so with that, I'll hand over to my co-presenter, Jane, who also has a story to share of her own.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lynn. Yeah, so my identity came crashing down about 10 years ago when I all of a sudden found myself in the hospital in ICU for over a month on a recovery plan, overcoming a very rare fungus that took over my lung and made it almost impossible to breathe. So that was my health crisis that really had me re-examining my whole life. Ended up me moving across the country, me leaving a 30 some odd year marriage, me changing careers totally, and really pivoting, as the title of the presentation talks about, to a life that to me is just so full of joy and happiness now, as I spend time with my 5 grandchildren. I am a roving adventurer. I no longer have a fixed address myself. I rove from place to place. I'm currently, today I'm in California at my son's house. So I find myself all over, spending time with my grandchildren and loving life, doing the work that I've always meant to do, which is coaching and helping others find their path, find their purpose, find their values. And that's what we're here today to talk about. Back to you, Lynn.
Perfect. Thank you, Jane. So really what we're here to talk about specifically is what happens when life gets disrupted. And we're doing it through the lens of COVID, but I will, as you'll notice, kind of branch out a little bit more and talk a little bit about technology and health and whatnot. But really at this point in my life, what I'm focused on is how do you go through something so life altering as cancer and come out the other side and not have learned something, not do something different, to just slot back into my old life and my old career, doing all of the things that I feel culminated in my diagnosis in the first place. How do I not slide back in there? Because that would be the most obvious thing to do, is just to pick up where I left off. But I think this journey has made me realize that I have to reflect on what's happened and why I got sick. And in the looking through the lens of COVID, I think we as a society also have to pause and look before we move forward. Don't just keep going as things were. Something needs to change. A pivot needs to be made. And that's what I really wanted to delve into today. So when we talk about career doubts, I think the first thing that I want to impress upon the audience here today is that you really are not alone. That this is, along with the COVID pandemic, there's also an epidemic of people that are reconsidering what it means to have a career. So I'm going to launch into a series of quotes and stats that I've been able to pull out, and they're all very recent. You'll see at the bottom how recent they are, about what's happening in the work world and the Canadian career climate. So what's unfolding is not just a great resignation, but a great prioritization. So for those, I'll just take a moment who haven't heard, tens of thousands of people are resigning from their job in droves. Some say that it has to do with people saying, well, now that COVID has hit, people who are on the precipice of retirement have decided to retire early, and that's what's making the numbers so high. But there's also, you can read through LinkedIn or any social media, there's just a shift in how people are looking at things, and I believe that that's also feeding into the Great Resignation and why people are leaving. So employees are putting a greater focus on their well-being, and well-being that means their physical well-being, their social well-being, their mental well-being. They're putting a higher value on their family, childcare, instead of sending their child off to daycare or having somebody else look after an aging parent. They're getting more and more involved in that. And also just other hobbies and interests, things that help them define who they are. All of those things that I showed on that first slide about how I defined myself, those things don't just go away because I have a career. People are starting to say, how can we integrate those into our lives? And by extension, people are looking at what work means, how they work, and why they work. And specifically, when we're talking about Gen Zs and millennials, 52% of them, both globally and in Canada, said that they think about leaving their jobs in the next 12 months. So just think about over the next year, 52% of people changing careers. Jane and I had something happen to us that created that impetus for us to change. But this is more than half of these cohorts saying that they're looking to change their job in some way, especially if their current position prevented them from enjoying their life. That is a fundamental reason. It's not about pay anymore. It is about how can I create balance in my life? And I am willing to disrupt everything to get it. So again, that's a fundamental shift that's been created during COVID. Canadians are increasingly disconnected from their work. 72% see it as a means to make money, and only 36% view it as a fulfilling activity. I don't know why this quote in particular was so poignant to me, but it just shows that people are doing work, but they don't feel connected to it. It's almost a means to an end. You go into the office, you spend the majority of your time there, and you're not even feeling connected to that work. So what next then? The true indicator of career satisfaction, in my perspective, is how you feel on Sunday afternoon about returning to work on Monday. If Sunday afternoon is ruined because all you can do is worry about what's piled up on your desk or what's waiting for you when you get back to your desk on Monday, those are indicators that something needs to be rebalanced in life and in your career. And what would a presentation be without a few good cat memes? So of course it's Monday. Does this look like my Friday face? And Mondays, am I right? So that's that feeling we all know. I'm assuming, again, I'm not really sure who the audience is on this call, but if you're retired and you're thinking about even waking up on Monday and you used to have a job to go to and now you're missing that job, there's still that feeling of discomfort. So I want to cover all of those points in the next couple sections. So what's changed? What's made things? And we can say COVID changed, but what fundamentally, what concretely has made these changes happen in our lives? And there's two parts to it. I'm going to talk about something called the Amazon effect, and I kind of alluded to the fact that technology has made some shifts in how we work and how we think about work, and then also COVID. So this next section is really covering those two key areas of change. So the first one is the Amazon effect. And so when Amazon started, it really changed how people dealt with commerce online, and even just their expectations of delivery and customer service. There was a level of sophistication that was brought to the table by Amazon that created a new bar that every other business had to meet. You had to be responsive immediately. You had to recommend like products. You had to have free shipping. There's a bar that's been set, and it's really changed the landscape of how we live and how we shop. Now, the pandemic-induced changes include lack of job and role security. People who once felt safe in their role, all of a sudden their industry might have changed in a way that was no longer supported by the economy during COVID. Things physically shut down, storefronts shut down. Now people are worried about whether or not they, as well, the events industry is a great example of an industry that really shifted, and tons of people got laid off or furloughed. The requirement of new skills and competencies. You might still have a job, but your job may now be online. Think about all the teachers that had to pivot during this time. Teachers who were used to standing in front of a classroom and delivering their curriculum face-to-face are now being forced to learn how to do all of this online and to upload coursework. Relearning how customers behave. Again, a lot of habits that might have been hidden when somebody was physically walking into a store, all the due diligence that happened offline of somebody researching a product. Now everything is happening online. It's only available online. Shopping for food is only available online. So how do people shop, and what does that behavior look like? And how do we adjust our business model to compensate for that? Oops. And then adapting to news, and then addressing and countering negative sentiments on social media. So during this time, people took to whether it's Twitter or whether it was it's eluding me now, for food, when you're going on and you're voting for your favorite restaurants, going online and making comments about the companies that you're dealing with and their customer service and whether they were slow to respond to you. All of these platforms they saw so much action during COVID. And so that meant two things. One, it gave the consumer an outlet to vent, but at the same time, it meant that businesses had to have their people responding to it, because negative comments just floating out there without any kind of response can actually breed more discontent and can mean loss of sales, loss of business, loss of brand reputation. And so a whole new sector of employees kind of have been on the rise over the last several years, these kind of community managers who are out there trying to counter negative sentiments or thank people for their positive sentiments that are being posted on these platforms. But again, it's either you have to find somebody who's already on your team to do this work, or you need to actually hire people to do this work, but it cannot be ignored anymore. So 64% of consumers and 80% of business buyers, which are people who are consumers who are buying things for their business, said that they expect companies to respond and interact with them in real time. Now, that is the Amazon effect to the nth degree. It is people who think, if I have a negative comment that I tweet out, I want somebody to respond to me immediately. And so the pressures that puts on a business to be responsive are incredible. And then on top of that, you've got companies expected to do more with less. So I gave one example of the more that companies are having to do, but at the same time, a lot of people who are leaving their job or switching jobs are creating less human resources to do that work. There's new people coming on board that need to be trained. The turnover is astronomical. And so these companies are trying to fill these new voids, move things online if they weren't online before, respond to all of the customer feedback, but they have fewer people to do it. And as a result, employees are required to keep up or even accelerate the pace. So all of these things are culminating into what I'm calling the fallout. And so some of the specific things that are happening to individual workers are that they're taking on more work as a result. They're working longer hours. They're losing their energy and their engagement. It's burnout. And they're moving so quickly that mistakes are being made. And let's be honest, as much as we would like to think that our bosses can understand that the first few things impacted the fact that we're making mistakes, the fact that we're doing more with less, we still have to answer to somebody who is responsible for the bottom line, or to stakeholders or to shareholders. And those mistakes aren't always pardoned. We lose the real work in a sea of urgent tasks. I always used to say that if everything's urgent, nothing is urgent. And what's happened right now is everything has to be done quickly and immediately, because that's the Amazon effect. People expect that level of responsiveness. And we're doing all of this with a loss of human contact and connection. And that can't be understated. I think that we put a screen in between ourselves and our peers or our customers, and we think, okay, well, we've solved the problem of connectivity during COVID, but the human connection, sitting in a room full of people where the energy just builds when you're brainstorming, or being able to look somebody in the eye and apologize if a mistake was made. A lot of these things are lost, and they are having an impact on our health, mentally, physically, emotionally. So now we're going to shift to a taking stock. What do we do? What have we learned? What can we look at that's happened during this time that can be a beacon of hope for the future? And it's really all about thinking, how do we move forward with all of this going on in a new way that doesn't just repeat the cycle that we were in before COVID? And so I love this quote by Winston Churchill: never let a good crisis go to waste. And so this is taking something that is disastrous, that is a crisis, that is a pandemic, and saying, how can we now pivot in a way that makes us stronger on the other side of it, whether that's more financially stable, a better work-life balance. How do we create change in the eye of the storm? So I'm going to introduce two concepts. One is Kensho and the other is Satori. And Kensho is growth through temporary pain. And I'll give an example of this. So if you have a breakup, or if somebody in your family passes away, or you lose your job, or you fail at something, all of these things are painful in the moment. They create long-term growth though. You're able to reflect on them, and you're able to see that happened, but I'm stronger on the other side because I've learned something through this experience. Kensho is usually gradual and slow. It happens over time. You might not even notice that you've learned or you've grown until you look back and you think, I don't think like that anymore. On the other side, Satori is growth through sudden insight. So, a mentor asks you, what would you do if you couldn't fail? And all of a sudden in that moment, you really stop to reflect on that question and you think, I'm not doing my life's purpose here. And in that moment, something shifts in you and you never go back. It's a pleasant type of growth. It gives you confidence and courage to take on new challenges that you wouldn't have if you hadn't have had that Satori moment. So here's a graph that kind of shows what those moments look like over time and in terms of your quality of life. So in the Satori moment, you have this growth, this sudden insight, and you're propelled upwards and your quality of life gets better. Whereas a Kensho moment, you usually have a dip before a rise. And usually those rises are almost, they're more poignant than those Satori moments, but you have to go down first before you go back up. So with those in mind, what I would implore people to do when they're looking at their own careers, whether or not, again, you're a student and you're coming into your career for the first time and you're thinking, what do I want to apply my education towards? If you're retired and you're thinking, I spent my entire career as an accountant and I still have skills and I still have energy and I still have the desire to contribute to society, what do I want to do? How do I want to contribute? Or if you're mid-career and you're just dissatisfied, you feel overly burdened by the responsibilities of work and the stress levels, your health is suffering, your family connections, your community connections are suffering. How do you use these moments to shape what comes next? So I ask that you take a moment reflect on what those Kensho experiences and those Satori moments are in your life, things that helped you grow when you look back in the rearview mirror. What caused or inspired them? What were the things that were going on at that time in your life that made that happen? Were you in a more receptive frame of mind because you were focused on your own inner thoughts and not just busy with the churn of day-to-day life? And how have they changed you for the better? Really stop and think. Just was it a mindset? Did I change something in my life in a physical way? Did I physically move to a new location? As Jane said, she disrupted her whole life and she started becoming nomadic almost. Or was it more of a mental shift? Is there a theme in them? A girlfriend of mine said, think of the moments where you felt the most happy. And is there a common theme that you can recognize throughout those? And is there something in there, like were you talking on stage? Were you in a group of people? Is there something in that you can use to inspire what comes next for you? And can you recreate these moments again? So all of the things that we just talked about, is it a physical group of people that you were with that made you feel inspired by something? Was it connecting one-on-one with a mentor who asked probing questions? Can you recreate that? And if so, how? So with all of that in mind, and with considering that, yes, there's been a lot of disruption, and I think about it mostly through my cancer lens right now, but also through the COVID lens and the technology lens. Through all of that, knowing that I don't want to wallow in a victim state, how do I pivot and how do I find my center? So fate whispered to the warrior, "You can't withstand the storm." And the warrior whispered back, "I am the storm." A woman in my cancer group actually brought this. She has a blog that's actually called I Am the Storm. And she talks about how when everything was swirling around her, she had to find her center in herself, and she had to become the force. And that meant holding up her family, advocating for herself in terms of career and long-term disability, access to long-term disability resources. She became the force in all of the kind of crazy things that were spinning around her, in her example in cancer, but also we can do this in our lives with COVID as well. And so I go back to this and I think about how I had defined myself, and these were all the things that I defined myself as, and this is who Jane had defined herself as. And then all of a sudden it's gone. Who are we? Where is our center anymore? If we're not all these things that we thought we were for all these years, what are we? And so I implore you to get clear on your purpose, values, and strengths. And this is the most fundamental thing that I believe people need to really focus on as you make pivots post-COVID, is taking a look at, if I'm going to make a shift, I want to do it with purpose. I want to do it in a value-based way. And I want to do it where I'm leading with my strengths. So I would hear these things all the time, and I thought, well, that sounds all fluffy and good, but like, what does that actually mean? And so the next few slides, I'm walking through the strengths component of that specifically, because for me, I lost all my strengths. My clarity of mind went away when I went through chemo and radiation. You get brain fog. It's a real thing. My ability to even talking today, I find myself stumbling over my words in a way that I never would in the past. I'm just always grasping for that next word. So what are my strengths? And I can't say sharpness of mind because I don't have that anymore. So what are the things that I can hang my hat on and that will always be there regardless of whether or not I have cancer, regardless of whether or not there's a global pandemic, regardless of whether or not technology shifts in a way that changes how I have to operate in the world. So I had, there's different types of tools you can use. I am not attached to VIA in any way personally or professionally, but this was a tool that I used to find my strengths, and it's called the VIA Character Assessment. And it asks you a series of questions, and it helps to tease out your core strengths. And so for myself, what I realized on the back end of this survey was that I had a real ability to connect with people socially. I had a social intelligence, how to navigate a room, to how to understand social cues. I had an appreciation for beauty and excellence. I had a curiosity for life and for learning. I had a creative side to me. I always approach things with a sense of humor. I love working in a team. All of these things have nothing to do with my mental health, or whether they're independent of my health. They would be independent of a global pandemic. These are strengths that I personally own. And from there, you can then extrapolate. This is a very tactical slide where you start to see how you can take these strengths, which again might sound airy-fairy, just figure out what your strengths are, but you can then say, how do I take my love of learning and parlay that into a career, or even a career pivot? It doesn't have to be a completely new career, but can I infuse my love of learning into my existing career? I could become a teacher. I could go back to school and become a researcher. Or on the flip side, for my creativity, I can look at doing interior design or writing or becoming a landscape architect or a photographer. And again, these can be hobbies that you can supplement your life with, but they fill a bucket for you. They play to your strengths and they make you feel good about who you are because you're doing something that you know you're good at. And that feeds an engine that allows you to drive things forward. Also taking a look at what's working. So if you have your career and it's on a trajectory already, and you think, you know what, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are certain things that are actually really working in my career for me. I'm able to clock out at 5 o'clock, and that really works because then I'm able to spend time with my family afterwards. Or, you know what, I do get an opportunity to do a lot of public speaking, or I do get an opportunity to do writing. I just don't like X or Y, but focus on what you do love. It's so easy to go home and just ruminate over the things that weren't working in your day or in your week or in your month or your year in some cases. But I implore you to think about what is working and to take stock of that and to see where you can lean into those areas. What's important to maintain? So if I was going to change careers, or if I was going to see if I could pivot somewhere within my current organization, what are the things that I would need to stay? What are my non-negotiables that I would have to take with me? Can you find or create more joy? And again, my sense of humor, just bringing that to the table on a day-to-day basis, it makes other people laugh. It gives me a feeling of joy that I'm able to make other people laugh. And it's a cycle that lifts people upward. So just infusing that joy into the moments. Again, I know it seems all airy-fairy and kumbaya, but I call it connecting the dots. If you infuse a moment of joy here, and then a couple hours later you infuse another one, and you infuse another one, and you continue to move those closer and closer together, you'll notice that your day seems more filled with those joyous moments than before you started to purposefully infuse those moments. And what resources can you access? Do you have time that you can take off? Can you take a sabbatical from your work? Do you have time in the evenings where you can go back to school and re-educate? Do you have financial resources to go back to school to get recertified in something that might put you on a completely new path? Or are there mentors? Actually, the way that Jane and I got connected in the first place is that I hired Jane as my coach. I met her at a conference. We started talking. I felt that she was the type of person that would be able to help guide me through some of the challenges that I was having in my current workplace. And it wasn't just about the tools and the techniques. There was an energy that she brought to the room when I sat with her that I knew resonated with me and would help me to find my center. And so if you don't have the time or the money, even if you don't have the ability to pay for a career coach, but you have somebody in your life who you feel can give you sage advice, again, I encourage you to seek those resources to try and help you figure out what the next stage will bring for you. Now, the next stage is going to be about being true to yourself. And I'm going to hand this over to Jane to lead this next area, because this really is where she excels in her career.
There we go. So can you go to the next slide, Lynn? Is that we're gonna, yeah. So wanted to just introduce this important concept of mindfulness. I'm sure many of you have been speaking about it. It's very popular in the press these days. And a lot of people have discovered through COVID actually the importance of being more mindful, being more fully present and aware of what we're doing at any moment in time, not being overly reactive, not being overwhelmed by what's going on around us, but just getting centered ourselves and staying true. So I thought what might be helpful here is to walk you through a little bit of a mindfulness exercise, because as we think about pivots, as we reflect on our careers and our purpose and where do we want to go next, it is important to tap into ourselves, tap into our center, and really connect with ourselves in a different way than many of us been used to. I know I went through business school and worked in corporate for over 30 years, and I spent a lot of time in my head, out of my body, but just in my head. And what I've learned over the last 8 years is to really get connected with my body and listen inside to what I'm experiencing, and experience the joy of being present in any particular moment. So with that introduction, I'm going to invite you to join me in a centering practice here. It'll just take really 5 minutes or so. So you're welcome to stand if you're able, or feel free to just stay seated and take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if you wish, or gaze gently downwards. And just drop your attention into your body. We center to become more connected to what matters to us, to really get more present. So bring attention to the top of your head and just feel or notice what's here. Pay attention to temperature, movement, your breath. Bring yourself inside your own skin. Feel the air coming in and let the exhale out. Okay, we're going to center in a few different directions. First, we're going to center in our vertical space. So we're going to feel a little bit of a stretch to it, lengthening up through our bodies from the tip of our heads, reaching up, lengthening. You might even notice the sensation of your hair on your head. Just imagine a vertical line running through your head, down through your body, grounding you. This line represents your dignity in the world. So sit or stand tall, imagining an invisible thread pulling you gently skywards from the crown of your head. Your back is straight, but not arched. You might want to hunch up your shoulders and then let them fall back down so they become relaxed. Move your jaw around so it becomes relaxed. Your hands can be loose by your side. Notice how long you feel. Now I invite you to feel into your width. So move your arms out to the sides. You may want to move them up and down so you occupy space on each side. This is your width. Your right to be here on this planet. Notice how wide you feel. Feel that breadth through the sides of your body, through the sides of your ribs. You breathe in, and just feel your width. With arms outstretched, you can imagine yourself being connected to everyone else in the world through your width. And now imagine your depth. Imagine that attached behind you is a tail, a strong, powerful dinosaur tail. This tail consists of all that supports you, all the learning, self-development over the years, your training and education, all those supporting you, your loved ones, your work colleagues, your friends, all of those who've come before you. They're all supporting you. Become aware of your depth, front and back, what supports you. Notice what goes in front of you, your future. Notice the vulnerability that you might be feeling on the front of your body. As two-legged creatures, the front of our bodies are exposed. And sometimes as we go into the future, there is a sense of vulnerability. Just feel into that. Remember that you've got your length, you've got your width, you've got your depth with you at all times. Just take some more deep but relaxed breaths, feeling your abdomen rise as you breathe in. Tune into what matters to you. What you really care about. Hold that deep inside you. Hold an intention as you go through the rest of your morning. Now I invite you to just wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently bring your attention back to our Zoom room. I just invite you to share in the chat. What was that experience like for you? What might you be feeling in this moment? Calmness, relaxing, centering. More aware of what's inside of me. Beautiful. Burdenless. Thank you. Lovely. You feel tension that was built up. Feel some energy. Yeah, and as we get into the practice of being more mindful through our day, whether that be chopping a piece of fruit and just enjoying the color and the smell and the sensation of it, just being more mindful. And Lynn just had a sip of your coffee. How does that taste, Lynn? Being mindful, right? Of really just being in the moment and appreciating what is happening right here, right now in our bodies. And that can be very powerful resource that you can bring to the world, right? As you stay grounded in who you are, stay centered in who you are. So being true to yourself when we're triggered, if we have done a lot of practice of mindfulness, we have a lot more resilience so that we can, in the moment, And we get triggered all the time through our day. Somebody might cut us off in traffic, or give us a frown, or say something that might hurt our feelings. And at any point in time, we might be triggered. And what's important is to try to notice the emotion that's coming up. And if you have this practice of mindfulness, you will be more apt to notice what is the emotion that's coming up, and being able to name it. You know, there's an expression, name it to tame it, right? So if you can identify, you know, that's anger, that's frustration, that's disappointment, that's sadness, whatever the emotion is, if you can name it, it allows you to separate the emotional experience from who you are. It allows you to step up a level and observe the emotion for what it is. It's an emotion. And when you see it, then you can just take a pause. Don't try to change it. Just notice it. Just notice it. The very act of noticing it sometimes takes that intensity away from the emotion. Getting present in your body and breathing just allows some of that initial negative chemicals that are going through your body to just dissipate. And the breath brings you back into a space that allows you the ability to choose what to do with this situation. Instead of reacting, you're now in a position to respond. You can make a choice to respond instead of just react instinctively. And in that moment of choice, you can see, no matter what happens, that it can be the worst thing in the world that could happen to you. But if you can see it as a gift, you can make a choice that whatever the situation is, it is a gift to you. So this is what can be referred to through, there's a program called Positive Intelligence, and it talks about this as the sage perspective, where every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift, an opportunity. You might say, well, how is that possible, right? How could anything be a gift? But Lynn, what is the gift in your cancer?
Oh, honestly, there's too many to list. And that, if that sounds disingenuous, I promise it's not. I've had an allotment of time that I can reallocate to my family and to myself, to my mental health. The number of people that have rallied around me during this was humbling. People who I thought as peripheral in my life really stepped in to support me during this journey. And I now recognize the depth of their caring for me. There's just so many little things that when you stop and you look at them, I always say it's like carrying around a hammer. If you're carrying around a hammer and you're looking for negative things, you're going to find negative things. But if you're carrying around a hammer and you're looking for the good, you're going to find that too. So I've been looking for the good in all of this, and there's many things that I'm blessed for.
Yeah. Great. So choosing the sage perspective, taking the sage perspective, and I had a very similar experience as we were preparing for this presentation. Lynn and I were talking about our experiences, and I had shared with Lynn a story of when I was on the mend after my illness. I spoke with someone else who had a life-threatening illness, and said, you know, does this feeling of just being happy to be alive every day, that excitement of getting out of bed, does that ever dissipate? And he had been many years sort of post his illness, and he said, no, he said, it's a gift. It really is a gift to every day know that you can embrace the day and really live fully.
And did you feel like that before you were?
No,
right?
I did not. I did not. And I remember just thinking, like, how can other people learn this gift without having to go through the pain and suffering that I went through.
But you
And
don't, because that's those Kensho moments that you have to go through it to
yeah,
learn from it, right?
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And a lot of people go through them and don't learn from them. That's the piece here, right? So you get to choose the perspective that you want to take, and to choose the sage perspective, to choose the perspective that this is a gift, is a conscious choice that you can make. But you do need to reflect and look for the gift, because quite often it's not obvious. Where is the gift in this? Somebody just cut me off and I'm going to be late for work. Where's the gift in that, right? But if you choose the sage perspective, you can find the gift in that, right? You can find the gift in that. And there's 3 questions that often help where the gift shows up. The one is knowledge, right? So what am I learning from this situation? What's the knowledge that I've learned through this experience, right? So taking that knowledge with you. A second gift might be the gift of strength. You're building some muscle, you're learning how to respond. And there's a strength that you can now embody and take that confidence forward, that you have this resilience, that you have this strength of empathy, or whatever your strength you've developed through this experience happens to be. And the third type of gift might be a gift of inspiring action. So I've experienced this and now I'm going to go and do something, right? So I experienced an illness. Now I'm going to do something very different with my life going forward. So it often isn't initially seen that way. And the more you can build your mental muscle, the more mindful you can become and build your muscle in advance, the easier it will be to find the gift. But the bigger the tragedy that you're experiencing is, the harder it is to find the gift. So it's not easy, but if you build this mental muscle of taking the sage perspective through the little things that are happening through your day, you're going to be in a better position to take advantage of that sage power when it comes, and see the opportunity as an opportunity, as a
I
real
noticed
gift.
that Mary's posted something in the chat. I think we'll address it more fulsomely at the end in the Q&A, but I wanted to acknowledge that she's saying when you're going through something hard, sometimes it's okay to just be devastated. And I don't think we're trying to say that there's this Pollyannish view that you need to just skip over the hard parts and get to the acceptance and the gift part. We can speak a little bit about that more, but thank you for your point, Mary. It's valid.
Valid point. Yes, absolutely. And grief is a whole process, and it takes time.
And grief isn't just about the loss of from death. It can be the loss of a career. You can grieve the loss of a career. You could grieve the loss of your hair.
Mhm.
There is grief, and there are steps that you can go through to get there. And sometimes one of those steps is just being angry.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And you've got to feel the emotion. If you don't feel it, then you're numb to it, and you're not going to be fully living. You absolutely have to feel the emotion, and that's why when you experience the emotion, just feel into it. Just what is that? But the critical thing is not to leave your hand on that hot burner for longer than it needs to be. Okay, you need to have your hand on the burner to know that it's hot, but then you can remove your hand from the burner. Okay, and knowing you have that power to remove your hand, but you absolutely have to feel it first. If you don't have the ability to feel, then you're going to burn your hand for sure, right? You've got to be able to fully feel it. So there are these conscious ways of when you're experiencing a challenge to think about, how do I want to deal with this challenge? So if I want it, I see it as a gift. Okay, there's an opportunity here, but what power of mine do I want to tap into right now? And we can think about it as having 5 different powers that we all possess. We all have these powers. And at any time, just make a conscious decision as to what might be helpful here. So in the first case, you may want to have empathy. And it may start with empathy for self, right? You may want to just start with self-empathy. It could be empathy for others. So how can I empathize with this other person in this moment, right? How can I be kind to myself in this moment? And that's often a really good place to start when faced with a challenge, right? The second power might be one, you can imagine yourself as an anthropologist, just going in and being totally curious of this new culture that you've just discovered, deep in a jungle, and you've never seen these type of people before, and you're just totally curious. And if you can put on that curiosity hat, that let go of any need to know anything, and go in with that pure curiosity, it's extremely powerful way of approaching a situation. Instead of reacting, you can respond with curiosity. Tell me more about that. Really interested in where did that come from, right? And really trying to get behind it, really understand it from that curious place. The third element is around innovation, creative ideas, what might be possible here, right? And really thinking about that. The fourth one is perspective taking, and that might be looking at it from a longer term perspective. What would my older, wiser self say, looking back on this challenge that I'm experiencing today? And being able to take that perspective can be really helpful in grounding you. And finally, action. What is that inspired action that I might want to take in this moment? Right? How might I act now and do something specifically? So you can think about times in your life when it comes to putting this into practice. Lynn talked about your strengths and your values and your purpose. I would really encourage everyone to think about their purpose and to try to articulate your own purpose in a sentence or two, okay, to really have that clarity. It's not something you have to tell everybody else what it is, but it's something that has to be meaningful to you. And often people struggle with, I can't find my purpose. Because they think it's out there somewhere in the future. And it's out there, some amorphous place. And what I would encourage you to do is to know that you have been living your purpose to an extent through your life. Maybe not fully, right? But to some extent, you've been living your purpose. And if you think about those times, those moments when you were most fulfilled, when you felt like the wind was at your back, things came easy, right? You were in flow. Time sort of sometimes just didn't felt kind of timeless in a way. And you were feeling that high motivation, that inspiration. Those are moments to reflect back on. And if you capture a series of those moments, you can step away from that and look at, what is that thread? What is bringing those in alignment? And in there is your purpose. So what were you doing in those moments? When did they take place? Where were you when they happened? Who were you with? And how can you recreate those? So you can also think about what needs do you feel compelled to meet? Like when you look around your family, your community, your world, what are those needs that you feel drawn to, that you see as needing to be met in some way? You can think about it. How do you love contributing? What contributions do you get real joy from making? And another perspective to take when discovering your purpose is, what's the legacy you want to leave? What's important to you to leave behind in this world when your time on this planet is over? So really reflecting deeply on your purpose can be so helpful in getting centered so that you can move forward.
Thank you, Jane. And so just to recap what we've covered today, there's this notion of not being alone. And I know that over this period of COVID, we've all felt very isolated from each other, physically isolated, emotionally isolated. But you are not alone during this journey. And inherent in that takeaway is this idea that we need to turn to the person on our left and the person on our right and say, you may be going through something similar. Can we go through this together? And then also, on the flip side of that, to accept help when it's offered. That was a very hard lesson for me to learn when I got sick, was to be able to say, I know that I haven't been there for you, but you now want to come and bring me meals, or to look after my child while I'm doing my appointments, and to be able to accept help. But in this regards with your career, it's okay to accept help too. It's okay to reach out to your friends and say, help me brainstorm help me workshop what my next stage of my career can look like, and be open to whatever that looks like, because sometimes the perspective will come from somebody looking in. It's not always easy to look at ourselves and understand what our purpose and our strengths are, but using tools like that via Strength Finder, or like I said, talking with your friends or with a mentor to help tease these things out of you, that third party help can be invaluable as you look moving forward. And this is also an opportunity to rebuild. We talked about growth and we talked about no crisis gone to waste. This is an opportunity. As we saw in the chat earlier, sometimes it's hard to see when you're in the moment and it's painful. But we do have to recognize that it's like the world has been shook up like a snow globe, and all of the snowflakes are fluttering around. And do we want them to land right back where they started? Or do we want to take this opportunity when everything is in disarray to maybe shape the way things settle back down? So, but do it purposefully. Pivot based on your purpose, values, and strengths, not on what your resume looks like, not on how much money you're going to make. I think that whatever comes next, and I'm not a sage, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that whatever comes next is going to have to be a more balanced world. So let's take that opportunity. And then the last thing I want to leave this group with is to go after what you want. It's easy to focus on the obstacles, but I implore you to focus on your goal. And again, that's walking around with that hammer and looking for those true moments where you feel like, yes, this feels right to me. And sometimes that means getting quiet first so you can hear your own voice. But when you really listen to yourself and you do some of this hard work and you're quiet for a bit, you can start to hear the directions that are right for you and focus on those goals and move towards them instead of focusing on the obstacles that are holding you back from them. So with that, I wanted to say thank you, everyone. I know we've gone a few minutes over time, but I'm really grateful to have shared my experience and for Jane to coming and supporting me on this journey as well.
And thank you, Lynn and Jane, for presenting your views. And sorry, I'm playing with my my screen. Real-time action here. So again, thank you very much, Lynn and Jane. It's been an absolute pleasure for allowing us to hear your stories, to learn techniques, especially the mindfulness. I know I've heard a lot about it, but haven't put it into practice. So this is the opportunity for the audience to ask their questions. I know, as you had referenced before, Lynn and Jane, there were a couple of comments that have been put in the chat box. If you wish to speak further, I allow that, and then welcome others who may have a question, a comment that they would like to share today. So Lynn, Jane, do you want to review what Mary and
Tiger?
had mentioned when you were speaking?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, Mary, absolutely. It is hard to see unwelcome challenges as gifts in the moment. And often it takes perspective, and it's important to feel into the pain of the emotion of the situation. And once you've really experienced that and you've felt that, then it's important to, again, use the analogy of take your hand off the hot stove, right? Be kind to yourself, have some self-empathy, and move forward with knowing that somewhere in here, and you may not see it now, but if you honestly believe that the sage perspective, you will find the gift. And I remember when I was in ICU, I had nurse or someone came in to speak to me one day, and she said, you know, you won't believe this, but one day you're going to look back on this and see this as a gift. And I remember that very, very clearly. And she must have said that to, I don't know how many patients over the years. But at that moment, I had already seen enough gifts in that experience. And I said, I already have, you know, and I was lucky to have be able to experience it there, but I had a month of lying in bed thinking, right? So again, it takes a while and it can be hard, and we just need to be kind to ourselves and work at our own pace. But the more mindful we can be, the more kind of good practice we can have, the easier it is to be able to use those more challenging moments and see them as gifts.
And sometimes it takes looking at somebody else who's gone before you. I mean, you think about things as dramatic as the loss of a loved one or the loss of a child. In those things, how can you find the good in it? I'm sure it's devastating. If you take a look at someone who's gone through it and has that experience in their rear view mirror, and look at their lives and say, okay, they're a whole person. There's something that happened that was tragic and it was devastating, but they've moved through it, and look to the examples of people on the other side of that experience for inspiration.
Yeah,
to see where your own trajectory might lead you.
Yeah, a great example of that. You mentioned the loss of a child. I can't imagine anything worse than that. And I know that the woman who started the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers lost her child, and it created that inspired action that she took. And think of how many children's lives she saved through her work and through the work of the teams that she's led. So it's quite astounding what's possible.
Thank you both for responding to Mary's question. Howard asked if the information, this presentation is recorded. It certainly is. Howard and everybody attending will receive a link. We continue to respond to any questions that anybody may have, and while we wait for people to find the keyboard and pound in those questions, I have one for both of you. And what I'm wondering is, for some of us that have had successful careers and think we're continuing on with our career, that we suddenly have been called in by HR and presented with a retirement package that we weren't expecting. Really, what are our next steps, knowing that, you know, we don't have incredible wealth that for whatever reason, we were hoping to work more, to have a bit more money. So we know we have to go to work, but suddenly all of this has been dumped on us. Any words of wisdom? How we should move forward? You know, should we journal? Really, how do we pivot when we weren't expecting this at all, but knowing we just can't sit back and go for long walks?
Sure. I think one of the most important things is to take a bit of time though. And I know that sitting back and taking walks was just the example that you threw out. But I do truly believe that you need to sit and you need to process what happened. Again, we talk about sitting in the grief for at least a moment, just to recognize that there was a loss of a career, there was a loss of an income, potentially a peer group that you associated with at work, and taking a little bit of time to just stop and synthesize that and understand the elements of that career that you know you will miss. And we talked a little bit about this in the presentation, is taking inventory. What things did you love about your job? What things did you not love about your job? What are those non-negotiables we talked about? And when you start to kind of distill all of these pieces down to what you need to look for moving forward, it will be a very purposeful choice when you're moving forward in that next foray of your career. And it might look completely different. I think that the knee-jerk reaction is just to get your resume, polish it up and start sending it out again in that kind of panic knee-jerk way. But being mindful about how we move forward, taking that inventory, then being mindful about how we move forward, I think is the key takeaway here. And for me, it's been about talking to everyone. Anyone who will give me time for a coffee, for a call, and whether it's networking specifically for a new role or networking to just learn more about myself and what my strengths are, so to understand what I should be applying for, that's the space that I'm in right now. Because I have not landed somewhere in a new career right now, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. So I'm looking under every stone and having every conversation that I can, so that when I do move forward, it is very intentional.
Mhm. Yeah. And I just building on what Lynn said, I think this idea of starting with your purpose, understanding your values, right? And your strengths, and looking at that intersection point of what does the world need, and what do I have, and where do they line up? So coming at it from that perspective, I know when I made my huge career shift, it really did take a toll on as I was rethinking my identity. And it was so weird. One of the silly little things that was on my mind was, I'm not going to have airport access to the lounge anymore. And that was something that became part of my identity as I kind of strolled through the airport and went into the Maple Leaf Lounge. And it was just, I was embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to even say that, but it was one of the things that just became part of my life over, a few decades of, this is just, oh, I'm not going to have my airport access anymore. And it was weird, but it was a piece of identity that I needed to let go of. And what really helped me was when I looked at what really made me happy. And what really made me happy was when I was in one-on-one conversation with people, in coaching kind of conversations with my team, or with other people. And so I thought, well, why don't I just do what I love doing, and make that a full-time career? And so I started my own practice, and took a few years to get it off the ground, but eventually I'm now so happy doing the work that I love to do. So just encourage you to take that time, look at your purpose, look at your values, and take advantage of other resources. Lynn mentioned the network, but there's a lot of other resources on how to restock, take stock, right? How do you do your financial plan? How do you think about things differently? Because maybe you're assuming you need to pay for rent by yourself, but maybe there are other living options that you can have, that you can explore at this stage, that might be of more interest to you. So just encourage you to just think big, let go of just jumping back in, as Lynn's mentioned.
That's great. Thank you, Jane and Lynn. And you're right, because whenever we hear news that we weren't expecting, suddenly it is all of that. Oh my heavens, I got to rush. I got to replace. I got to continue in the swing without stopping for that moment and really reassess. Maybe, as you both presented during this past hour, to look for those positive nuggets. And like you said, maybe this is opening a door we never thought about. So it appears everybody has asked their questions. I see the last is excellent session. Thank you both for sharing your journey and wisdom, and I concur with that. Someone else post, oh, there's a lot of thank yous. That's lovely. People posting how helpful this is. I want to remind everybody attending that again, you'll receive a recorded copy of this presentation, and as well, sometimes we walk away and a thought pops into our head. So anyone, please feel free to email any of us at the Life Institute, ourselves at Programs 50 Plus, or CanAge, and ask that question, and we'd happily respond to that. And so I'd like to remind everybody that we do have one more in the Take Charge Empowerment series, and that topic happens next week, same day, Thursday, from 10 to 11:30. And that one, how perfect could it be, is flipping retirement on its head, your exciting next chapter. So for those that have been on this journey and will continue next week, maybe we can all do a bit of homework and define our purpose and our strengths before Jana from CanAge presents. So again, thank you, Lynn and Jane, and a very big thank you to everyone who's attended today's event. We're pleased that you've taken the time to join us. There will be a feedback survey sent out to everyone, and it's also included in the chat. And these evaluations help all of us to continue to plan to share these amazing speaker series with all of you, and as well, how can we make it better for everybody? So again, thank you so much. It's a beautiful day. Hopefully we'll all get outside to breathe in that fresh air and enjoy. So again, bye for now.